Going to welcome everyone to the Katie Halper Show live, unplanned live stream. And Margaret Kimberley is, she's been on my show before. She's really great. She's an editor and contributor at the Black Agenda Report. She's also the author of Prejudential, Black Presidents. What is it? Prejudential. I've read it. It's really good.
Black America and the Presidents.
Prejudential, Black America and the Presidents.
Yes.
And she's also, you can make sure you follow her on Twitter, where she's, what is it? Freedom Rider, right?
Freedom Ride blog.
Freedom Ride blog, because she's really funny. And she's like very, if you think I'm at all like, what's the word? Scorched earth. I look pale in comparison to Margaret. So welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Yeah. And tell us where you are right now, geographically.
I'm at home in Harlem. And a beautiful.
And oh, by the way, if you feel free to have a drink, no pressure. If you want to have a drink, I didn't warn you.
I just have water, so I'm safe. But
are you a teetotaler?
No, just not right now.
Okay. Well, if you want to, because I didn't warn you ahead of time, feel free to if you want to, and I'll entertain people for 5 minutes or whatever.
That's okay.
Okay. Okay, that was a test to make sure you don't have a problem, which you don't. Okay.
I don't.
Sorry, so you're in Harlem.
Yes.
And have you been at any of the protests today? I saw you were warning people about how.
I did. I was. There was a protest on at 125th Street. I would say about 1,000 people. That's my estimate. There was a group that broke off and went on a march further downtown. I did not go with them. I did go home. There started to be quite an increasing police presence, and they seemed to be blocking off or preparing to block off the subways. So I just decided to go home. But it's a big crowd. Mixed race crowd, Black people, white people, Asian people, Latino people. So speakers, the usual rallies. It was in front of the state office building on 125th Street, which the police had blocked off. They blocked off the plaza, which is ordinarily open to the public. And people registered their outrage. There was a car caravan of showing support, passersby showing support. And I think it's an indication that this latest police murder that was filmed just repulsed most people. And there's genuine righteous outrage across the country, all over the country.
Where were you? Do you remember when you heard about the murder of George Floyd?
I started to hear about it. I suppose it was maybe it was Tuesday. And I wasn't paying attention that closely to it, that a man who died the way Eric Garner did. I did not watch the entire video. I believe it's too traumatizing. I know there's some people who feel they need to. I do not. The description of it was horrific enough for me, but it's something that has taken over discourse, taken over people's personal lives. It's one of those events where time stops, and everything this week is before and after George Floyd.
Right. Yeah. I watched it, and it was. It's funny how. Well, no, it's not funny at all. Even we see so much police violence, but still some are more close up than others. Like physically, or we see more of it than others, and there are some that I haven't seen, like I've chosen not to see. I think that if people don't look, it's not. I don't think anyone's obligated to be, like you said, it's traumatic or traumatizing. Yeah. I think it's like the issue is whether they literally, turning your head away from something literally is different from figuratively. And obviously you're very engaged politically. But yeah, this was really, really rough to see because it was like, I don't know. It was just, we obviously know what happened, but it was, seeing someone handcuffed, like with Eric Garner, it was totally disturbing. I don't know if did you see that video?
Yeah.
It was very disturbing. He wasn't and I'm not making light of it at all. It was murder, and it was an illegal chokehold just with someone's arm instead of a nightstick. And this was an illegal chokehold, but with someone's knee instead of a nightstick. But there was something about him already being on his stomach in handcuffs and that happening that was just so it was like the Eric Garner thing plus another layer.
Yeah, so then when you find, in both cases, they were stopped for minor offenses. Eric Garner, it was not about the loose cigarettes. Actually, right. He had broken up a fight. He was trying to do the right thing, and the police had been harassing him, and he just happened to be there. Right. But Floyd was accused of passing a counterfeit bill. I mean, something you should not call. And I really do hope that people know when you call the police, someone can end up dead. And the idea that anybody can be arrested for that at all, that people can be incapacitated, as you described, cuffed already and thrown to the ground, or there have been cases where black men have been shot. And police who were handcuffed, and they said they shot themselves. Right. So right. This is, but I think it's important for us to remember that every day in this country, 3 people are killed by the police. 1,000 people are killed by the police in this country every year. And we see these egregious examples because we see them. Right. But we don't know how other people die. Their families are not told the truth. They just are told somebody is dead and they get no answers. So we saw this, but I hope people remember what I just said, that this happens 3 times a day in this country. And also we need to connect it to larger issues about oppression in the United States. The United States, I would say objectively, is the worst abuser of human rights in the world. If you look at what the United States does internationally, the invasions, the proxy wars, the sanctions, the 800 military bases around the world, the fact that we have more people in prison than any, 2 million people in prison, and a lot of them end up in prison for minor offenses. Most of them are, by the way, most people incarcerated in this country have not committed a violent crime. So the prison population could easily be cut in half. The military budget could be cut in half. But people died alone. The COVID pandemic, where mostly Black people. There are some cities in this country where the only people who died were Black. So right. I hope that people see this as part of many systemic problems, and the fact that we live in this kleptocracy. We need to stop saying we're a democracy. Stop talking about being great, being free. It's all nonsense. And the COVID pandemic has exposed so many things that are wrong in this country, that people have been thrown out of work, some forever, but the rich have gotten richer. Right. And we have this phony presidential election. The only thing that's interesting about it is, how confused Joe Biden will be. I'm sure they drug him when he does sound good. I'm sure he's drugged or hypnotized or something. Right. He is. He's
definitely allowed to sleep for an entire week beforehand, I think.
Yeah.
And then he shot up with Adderall or something. Yeah.
Yeah. But look at what he does. What did he say? He bragged to a group of rich fundraisers saying nothing will fundamentally change when I'm president. But Trump is such a train wreck that it's easy to point to him and say, we have to get rid of him. He must be gone. But what would we get instead? Someone who's already said he's not going to change much. He's, might not have crazy tweets or use racist language, but would he undo Trump's tax cuts? Would he undo the sanctions? He's already said no to sanctions when people made a plea to ease sanctions on Iran when they were going through their COVID crisis. And Biden said, well, they could be lying. And, you'd get better federal judges. But aside from that, what would you get? Really?
Right. Sorry, I cut you off. Sorry.
Sure.
I'm just also putting your fans' comments.
Okay.
So 2 fists. Thanks. We got a hello from Australia.
Oh, Australia, very nice.
Yeah. I cut you off, but you were saying like that is the one thing that. So I had Malika Jabali on. Mm-hmm. You were both. Were you on a panel together? I know you both spoke at Left Forum.
No, we were not on a panel together. No.
Anyway, you guys. I hope.
I love her work.
Yeah, she's great. Yeah, and this came up, and she was saying how she totally gets and respects why people do think that there's a difference between, the presidents, and then we brought up the Supreme Court, which always seems to me the one thing that it's like really, I'm like, okay, yeah, I get it. Like that is the difference. Although Biden, as we know, helped Clarence Thomas get onto the Supreme Court.
Yes, he did.
Railroaded, Anita Hill. But I'm curious, like, do you have a position? And then, of course, I want to talk more about the protests, but these things are so interrelated because it's hard to talk about them without looking at the, political system in which they exist. But do you think there is you're Green Party, correct?
I am, yes.
So what do you have to say to obviously you don't agree with it, but to the harm reduction argument?
There isn't any harm reduction. I mean, this is where we've gotten the lesser evilism argument has gotten us to this place where look at Bill Clinton. What I remember being so happy, it's embarrassing now when Bill Clinton won, because there were all these, Republican landslides and, Democrats were winning one or two states. And it was like, oh, thank God there's a Democrat. What did we get from Bill Clinton? We got welfare so-called reform, which undid New Deal program, 60 years of a right to seek public assistance, which threw millions of people further into poverty. We got media consolidation. There were hundreds of media. Now there's 6, basically. Anything you read or look at is owned by one of 6 companies. We got the trade deals. They couldn't pass NAFTA with Bush Sr. They needed a Democrat to give them cover to do that. So that's the sort of thing that we get with when there is a change. What did we get with Obama? Everybody throws Obamacare in your face, which basically gives everybody the right to pay too much for insurance. There is the Medicaid expansion. I give credit for that. But George W. Bush killed 1 million people in Iraq. Obama destroyed Libya, tried to destroy Syria, made Bush's supposedly temporary tax cuts for the rich, made them permanent. What is it? I remember quite clearly that first debate he had with Mitt Romney. And he starts out saying, well, I'm sure Governor Romney will agree with me. We know we have to cut Social Security. What do we have Democrats for? Right. They live off the reputation of the past. And we have a far-right party and a center-right party. That's what we have in this country. And all the talk of opposing Trump and being the resistance, Trump gets everything he wants from Nancy Pelosi. They gave him a space force. They gave him the military spending. On one hand, he's a maniac. He's crazy. We got to get rid of him. Well, why do you give him everything he asked for in military spending?
Makes no sense whatsoever. I mean, it's the most inherently on its face contradictory position to have. This guy's a, Cheetah Mussolini existential threat. And then I feel like if you make this point, you're called like a Trump apologist, but you're not a fan of Trump. Like no one doubts that. No. But it's when people, it's like it helps Trump when you let the Dems off the hook for stamping, signing, sealing, and delivering his military budget.
Oh, absolutely.
Like, you think that you're harming Trump by talking about his tweets? Like that's how you're affecting change and speaking truth to power?
Well, it's, this is because of propaganda. There's been decades of propaganda from the Democratic Party telling us that we have to support them. And these horrible people, they foist these horrible candidates on us and then blame the left. It's always the left to blame when the people who can raise $1 billion, Hillary Clinton raised $1 billion, but then couldn't get 10,000 more votes in Michigan. That's on her. And if Biden loses, it's on them too. And so these same people who 4 years ago assured us that there's no way Trump could win, now they've told us Biden is more electable. The onus is on them to help him win. That's on them. They should be telling people, this is our path to victory. This is what we're going to do. But all they have is vote shaming and finger pointing. And I have to say, quite frankly, I don't think they really care if Trump wins. Their priority this time around was getting rid of Bernie Sanders. Right. He capitulated. Sadly, it's humiliating and it's horrible to watch. I had issues with him, but it's so much worse than I thought.
You had a soft spot for him.
Oh my God, I did, and I couldn't get this idea that we can have imperialism abroad and justice at home is not going to work. That was my big beef with him.
Yeah.
But his capitulation was so much worse than I thought. I wanted him to fight for a while, but he gave in. And so now and I hope the left has to decide. People ask, what's Bernie going to do? What are you going to do if you support him? What are you going to do if those were the things that were important to you? The Democratic Party has to go. They are awful. They can't even win. They cannot even win. Right. They lost 900 seats. All the propaganda. You remember when during the primaries, if Bernie gets a nomination, we'll lose seats across the country. They lost 900 seats when Obama was president. Right. 900.
Yeah, even by their own definitions of standards of blue, no matter who, they're failing. It's a failed business model, as St. Bernard said. You know who got really mad at him for saying that?
Who?
Is guy you're a big fan of his, Bakari Sellers.
Oh,
I know how much you love him. I know how much you respect him.
No, that's a whole other story. I'm not going to talk about people I can't stand, but
no Joy Reid or Neera Tanden them.
No.
But I have to share something that you guys tweeted. Keep talking. I just got to share. I want people to really appreciate this. If you say, usually people say I say the things out loud that they think, but you say the things out loud that I think. So that's really
okay.
I'm looking for the thing that you tweeted about Neera.
What did I say about her? Oh my God, she's dreadful. Yeah, it was about her having coronavirus. I think that's what I said.
Yeah.
She's one of the people who said you can't postpone the primaries. It's perfectly safe for people to vote. Well, I'm not glad she has it.
No, but you asked her. You said maybe it's karma. I mean, that was just a rational. So, it was just a point of inquiry on your part.
And it's I think valid to bring it up.
Well, no, I mean, I think it's she was one of the people who when Brianna Joy Gray tweeted out Simone Sanders' very dangerous and dishonest appearance on CNN saying that the CDC had said it was safe to vote. Neera Tanden was one of the people who said, report for voter suppression. She's probably that's our lane. Leave that to us.
She is one of the worst Democratic Party propagandists. That's all she is. I think that's what I want to write. My next book will be about propaganda in this country. But anyway, I'm still thinking it through. Okay. But that's what we're left with now. We live in this, the America empire. First of all, we shouldn't live in an empire, but we have a system that's in collapse, and we're watching it, we're seeing it, we're living with it, and it can go either way. Things can get better or things can get worse. But I think we're seeing in I'm calling it a rebellion in Minnesota and across the country after George Floyd's murder. We are seeing that people know that things are wrong, and they are looking for leadership and looking for organization, and that's what's missing. It is all to the good for this spontaneous uprising to take place, but in the absence of organizing, things can get worse. So in the face of the COVID pandemic, there are people who may lose their jobs forever. There's not going to be a return to our lives the way they were before. And but it's up to us. And I want to bring up another group I'm affiliated with, Black Alliance for Peace, and we have a campaign, No Compromise, No Retreat, and we talk about the issues I have brought up. We have a candidate pledge asking people running for office at all levels of government to pledge to cut the military budget in half, to demilitarize the police, to investigate every instance of lethal force, to close all the foreign military bases, to cut mass incarceration, to cut the military budget. And there has to be grassroots organizing. And this is something that hasn't happened in this country for a long time. So we're starting from scratch, but we can definitely do it. And I think we have to marry the domestic with the international. I was speaking about human rights abuses. There we are. Thank you. Calling on the UN to address human rights violations in this country. The US is always going to the United Nations about Hong Kong, which is part of China. And it's for people in Hong Kong and China to figure out for themselves, not for the US to use that as a weapon against China. But the U.S. needs to be investigated for all of these things that I have been talking about. We definitely, if the U.S. asks for everybody else to be investigated, anybody they don't like. Maduro is a drug trafficker. Now they're trying to say his wife is a drug trafficker. It's obvious and it's horrible. But the U.S. must be the next target for investigation.
I know. I wish the Carter. What is it? The Carter Center would monitor the U.S. elections.
Yeah, well, I think they already did and concluded it was the worst or something, something like that, and it is. But the Democrats don't say anything. Democrats were cheated out of 2 elections in the past 20 years. Al Gore, they stole Florida. They kept people from voting who were eligible to vote. Voter suppression this time around. Spoiled ballots that always happen to be in Black areas. So I say that Hillary cheated Bernie and then Trump cheated her, but the Democrats don't say anything, and they're not saying anything about how they'll prevent that this November.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it is surprise. I was really surprised. I guess it was naive, but where's the leverage? I mean, Bernie gave it up right away, and the Dems. I mean, the left should have been. I don't know. I think. I don't
know why he ran. It was so strange to me. I don't know why he ran at all. Did he really think they were just going to give him the nomination? He seemed to be totally unprepared for the fight.
So I think he ran. I think he did run to win, always knowing that, and he got so close, which is what makes it so painful. But I think that he ran to at least push the party to the left, which isn't even to the left. It's like push the party to the people. These, the things that he's pushing are just normal things that are
things people want.
Yeah, exactly. So, and then, but I think he did. I think his biggest thing is he has this moral code and a soft spot for Biden, and really does believe, and it's up to him if he believes this. He really does believe that Trump is an existential threat. Lots of people I know and respect. I mean, I think he is too, but I also think George W was an existential threat too. But I think that a lot of it was COVID stuff. I think he knew, as you refer to, with Neera Tanden's forcing the elections to move forward. Mm-hmm. I think he knew that Biden wouldn't stop, wouldn't pause them, and he didn't want to be responsible for bringing people out, even though the primaries in general would keep on going. Yeah. But no, it was very upsetting, and and
I think I think it got to him being blamed for Trump's victory the first time, even though it was totally bogus. Yeah. It's so funny. People forget. People blame him just because he challenged Hillary Clinton. That's why she lost. Yeah. In 2008, Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama had this knockdown drag out that lasted until June. He still didn't have enough delegates to get the nomination. They had to force her to finally drop out, promise her she'd be Secretary of State. He still won, and won by a comfortable margin, the popular vote and the electoral vote. So this idea that she lost because she was challenged is it's just a lie. But the propaganda has been so constant, so intense. I think Russiagate too, anything that explains away Trump being president. It's hard for people to admit that there are more than 60 million people wanted Trump to be president, and hard for them to admit that the Democratic Party messed up so badly. And so they will listen to anything. It's Vladimir Putin's fault. It's a celebrity's fault. It's Bernie Sanders' fault. It's everything except the people they depend upon. Democrats are like kids with abusive parents. If they feel like they can't talk back to them, it's horrible.
Yeah. In fact, I'm gonna. I thought that I want to do a quick Twitter reminder that we're doing this because we're doing it last minute. But I'm gonna leave you guys to watch, because this is what I got to show you this, and then we will hold on, because you mentioned this. Let me just make sure it's open. Where is this thing? Okay. So this is really, I can't help it because not enough people know about this. You were talking about the Hillary thing. Mm-hmm. So let me just add this one thing that we really should watch. Share audio. Okay. So let's watch this and tell me if you guys can hear it. Okay.
Watched Senator Sanders defending himself from your book, and I'm wondering, why did you go there, reopening a wound in your own party?
I don't agree with that. I wanted to tell what happened. The primary was part of what happened. I won a landslide victory. I know what it's like to win, and I know what it's like to lose. And when I lost to Barack Obama, I immediately turned around. I endorsed him.
You don't buy the party unity argument?
I don't. My husband did not wrap up the nomination in 1992 until he won the California primary somewhere in the middle of June. I convinced my supporters to vote for him. We all remember Bobby Kennedy was assassinated in June. I didn't get the same respect from my primary opponent.
I move that the convention suspend the procedural rules, and I move that Hillary Clinton be selected as the nominee of the Democratic Party.
Thank you, Senator Sanders. Senator Sanders has moved in the spirit of unity.
So, I just wanted to remind people, because a lot of people didn't know about this, about how she actually said, that she didn't want to drop out, right? Mm-hmm. They were asking, you don't buy that party unity stuff. She goes, I don't. And she actually invoked the assassination of Bobby Kennedy to justify staying in a race against Barack Obama, who had heightened levels of threats against him. And heightened levels of Secret Service staffing.
Yes.
And that is something she had to apologize for that. As much as the Clintons apologize. Although, you know what? The Clintons look like they are on an apology tour compared to Biden.
Well, it's, she is a horrible liar. First of all, they had to
not as bad as Biden, though.
Oh my God, they had to drag her out. Her supporters had to finally tell her it's time for you to get out. She did not immediately support Obama. She didn't make appearances first. Bernie Sanders made many. She even wrote him a note. He finally fought back and posted it on Twitter. Thank you, Bernie, for all your appearances. But he couldn't help her. He went from filling stadiums, and then he couldn't fill a gymnasium because people didn't want her. Right. His people wanted him and what he was talking about. So she
such entitlement.
Yeah, she lost on her own. She messed it up herself. And I think she's lurking around hoping. She's been very quiet lately, which is uncharacteristic. I think she thinks they're going to add, I don't know, Biden's so problematic. I wouldn't be surprised if he ended up not being the nominee after all. She's just a nightmare. She is a poison. She is, for the last 4 years, she has poisoned Democratic Party politics. And if the Biden or the Democratic nominee loses, it will be because of her. She can still be blamed.
She still got it.
She does. But there's still people who listen to her. I think Trump's victory was such a trauma People who already acted like, as I said, like abused children, didn't know where to turn or what to think. And this constant propaganda that it was Russia, that it was Bernie, it was Susan Sarandon. I mean, anything and everything to explain away the unexplainable. And I think all of these things are comforting because people don't have to think about how did this happen? And these people I put my trust in, they really screwed up that badly. So it's comforting to believe these crazy theories. And they're bringing up Russia again with the protests. I shouldn't be surprised, but we can see what happened, even though the protests are not organized, even though they're spontaneous, it's still scaring them that people are standing up. That is the last thing they want. So now we have Marc Morial, former mayor of New Orleans, now head of the National Urban League, today on CNN saying he wanted to know if Russians were involved. No, we have Americans who have righteous indignation, and they're very angry, and it's a good thing. These people talk about peaceful protest, but I am convinced they did not finally arrest that cop until that precinct was burned down in Minneapolis.
Sorry, keep up. I cut you off.
No, you go ahead.
No, you're the guest. Be my guest. Yeah.
Okay. No, it's absolute. They need to be afraid of us. And when people, because you don't know where this could lead, people are in movement because of George Floyd's murder, but it could turn into people being in movement about all kinds of things. There could be a general strike. People could start demanding peace. So who knows what people could demand once they wake from their slumber. So they have to find a way to delegitimize this very legitimate outrage.
Right. I have to lower my air conditioning.
Sure.
And then I want to do a live little just tweet telling people to get on this because again, it was
Sure.
What's it called? A Periscope. Do you want to tell people about, while I'm doing that, it's literally behind me. It'll take me 30 seconds. Do you want to tell people what politicized you? I know that I know the story because when I interviewed you. So if you want to tell them that, and while you're doing that, I'm gonna lower the AC.
Okay. I think the first thing to politicize me was the theft of the election in 2000, that Al Gore had the election stolen from him. That was a wake-up call for me. It was something we had always been told was hypothetical. It was possible to win the popular vote but lose the electoral college, but it happened, and he was cheated. And the Democratic Party went along with the cheating. And then George W. Bush becomes president. He invades, stolen election, invades Iraq, 9/11 used as a pretext for all kinds of aggression. So, excuse me, it was about this time I started writing. So all these things help to politicize me. But I think also it's important to be in solidarity with other people. We're always told we can do certain things by ourselves, but you can't grow politically on your own. And it could be writing colleagues like I had at Black Agenda Report and organizations I'm involved in like Black Alliance for Peace and United National Anti-War Coalition, UNAC. But we have to be in solidarity with other people, and we have to know our history and know that the people have been successful in the past, and we can be again. And it's the people who bring about change. We can't give these politicians credit when good things happen. It's because we're the ones who make things happen. But I'm committed to remaining a writer and an activist because we need new voices. Our voices are restricted to independent media, the corporate media, work hand in glove with the duopoly. And it's incumbent upon us, and it's a great thing that people like you, Katie, are able to have a platform because the New York Times, the Washington Post, and MSNBC and CNN, They don't tell us what we need to know. It's frightening to me, though, because unless you know who to follow on social media, unless you have a good YouTube person to follow, you don't know. You can read the New York Times and Washington Post and still not know what you need to know because they lie so much.
Right. I want to ask you a couple of questions. One is what you thought of the media's coverage of what's happening so far. I know you love Joy-Ann Reid, and the New York Times, and then I want to ask you your thoughts on the discourse around violence. And there's you tweeted something out, interestingly enough, about Michael Tracy, who you guys probably see eye to eye on Russiagate stuff, but not on this.
No.
And I think there are people who are overtly like they're terrible and they have really bad politics, but I think it is like it's hard to have the question of violence it's hard to talk about the issue of violence without seeming like you're like protest shaming. I think like it's fair game to have a conversation about the strategy and the tactics. And I think understandably, if you start to ask about that, you're acute, people will respond like, well, it's the state that's violent. The police are violent. It's like, yeah, no, I know. This is like among friends, So anyway, I just mentioned a bunch of stuff, but let's go. You can start with whichever point. The
media coverage, I think the first couple of days, it was just the shock of this video existing and the outrage that people felt. And I think they did a decent job of covering that. But now they're showing their true colors. Last 24 hours, we have seen elected officials blame. We actually have Black leadership, quote unquote, talking about outside agitators. The mayor of St. Paul, I've blanked on the man's name, Carter is his last name, a Black man who said, I'm told most of the people arrested were from out of state. They weren't from Minnesota. They're coming from elsewhere. Well, just the opposite is true. Someone did good reporting and just looked at the list of people arrested, and 88% of them are from Minnesota. It's just white supremacists. It's Russians, everything except people have had enough and are speaking up. So now we see the media working to delegitimize this rebellion. As far as the issue of violence is concerned, we live in a country, and I think we get into these arguments because people don't want to acknowledge how bad the system is we live in and how undemocratic. People have no out. We've seen people murdered on film. We saw Eric Garner, the cop who killed him, actually ended up getting a raise. Every time he went to court, he got paid overtime. The man doubled his salary after killing Eric Garner. It took the city of New York 5 years to fire him. So people know the likelihood of anybody going to jail is slim to none. And so any exhortation to be peaceful falls on deaf ears. Right. Why should people do the same thing that failed? They have to up the ante. And I think the fact that protesters, the district attorney, the prosecutor there in Minneapolis, a man named Freeman, the day before, he was saying, well, you never know. I don't see any reason for criminal charges. And protesters actually literally went to his house. Yeah, and torched one of the police precincts. That's why that man was arrested. And we cannot act like that is not the case. We do not have a system that's responsive. The prosecutors are in bed with the police. They work together. The police arrest and the prosecutors prosecute, and 99 times out of 100 get a conviction. So we don't have a system.
Unless it's for a police who's committed a crime, in which case it's like the opposite step.
Yes, it is. So we've seen
grand jury even, yeah.
Yeah, we've seen these egregious cases over and over again. People aren't stupid. People haven't forgotten. And just to be told, well, it's on video, everybody knows that doesn't mean anything. So if people are angry and if they steal from a store that has insurance, Target has insurance. I don't care if people took from Target. Yeah. It's I don't know that I would do it, but I'm not going to condemn people who did. We have people out of work trying. We have a system that's so horrible. People couldn't even get their unemployment. People who lost their jobs after the quarantine. Most states were lagging in even getting people the money they earned. At the most $1,200, or one-time payment of $1,200. And so people have a lot to be angry about. So I think the anger is not just about Floyd. It's about all of the injustices and the inequality in the country. So, and I'm not going to talk about Antifa and people came from, somebody, went from, I don't know, Chicago to Minneapolis to protest. And even if it's true, so what? What's wrong with people going to the scene of the crime to register their anger? I don't see that as being a problem. No. But I'm very concerned about anything that delegitimizes the outrage, the righteous anger that people are feeling.
Right. And also it's like, people who I just hope everyone is as outraged about, the government's violence and the police police violence as they are about this. And I do think that we can do, chew gum and walk at the same time. And and I do think it is hard though to have a discussion that looks at organizing strategies and also does not, but kind of built into that takes for granted the fact that there's not anything immoral, because I don't think there is anything immoral about what's happening. I'm curious about how, I don't know, to do it in the way that will get the fewest people killed, but not in a don't do that, guys, don't rock the boat, not at all like that. I do have some fear of there being a total.
Sure. Well, it's complicated. It is complicated. It's not a simplistic question.
Right.
And I think we have to acknowledge that and debate that and form the grassroots organizing we need so we can respond. So we're not reacting every time there's a new outrage and we have this conversation all over again, but don't really resolve it because we don't have a plan. And because unfortunately, too few people talk about the larger context of all the things that are wrong in this country that cause someone to be killed that way. So so we can debate it, but I'm not. I think I'm clear on this much. I'm not criticizing people who set that police precinct on fire.
Yeah, no, I'm not.
Especially, and the one agent provocateur we know of is a cop. The guy in black with the hammer. It was kind of ridiculous. He's like the worst agent provocateur of all time. He's carrying an umbrella and he's smashing windows with a hammer. He conveniently had a hammer. And the guy with the pizza box is chasing him. It was kind of comical. But, and I know they denied it. It's no. But the guy's ex, it's a bit hilarious. His ex said, no, that's him. I know that's him. Yeah. But so we know about that outside and to have Black elected officials talk about agitators. The mayor didn't say outside agitator, but we knew what he meant. It's not Minnesotans and people. No, I'm not buying it. And we must reject a lot of what passes for leadership in this country. These are people we cannot give any credence to what they say.
Yeah. Someone said, just want to show this. Someone said he was wearing his ex-wife's mask. If someone wants to put that link in there, we can show the photo of it. And then someone asked this, can you discuss history of the term outside agitator?
Oh, sure. Well, that was a term always used in the South in the days of the civil rights movement, the liberation movement. The segregationists would sometimes say that their colored people, their Negroes, were happy. And it was outside agitators who were causing problems and making these previously happy people unhappy. And it is discredited. And to hear anybody talking about agitator sets off alarm bells in my head. And it's like George Wallace, or I don't know how. I feel like ancient that I know who George Wallace is. But Google George Wallace for those of you who don't know who he was. But the segregationist elected officials in the southern states in the 60s always complained about outside agitators who were causing trouble amongst their previously happy people.
Right.
And that's why it's such a problematic word.
And they were often, they often were framed as, or actually were, communists or Jews. Here's an image of it. This is one of like a classic
Martin Luther King at the Communist Training School. Yes.
Yeah.
I don't know where he really was, but
and is that even him? I don't even think that's him.
Well, it's not a good picture.
It's like photo, yeah. I think where I think that is. I think that was I think it was at the Highlander School, which is where
probably.
Yeah, which is, for people who don't know, there was a place that trained organizers and activists like
Rosa Parks.
Rosa Parks, yes, exactly. Who's not like, as much as people, and you can speak to this better than anyone else, as much as people like to pretend that she was a lone actor inspired, and no disrespect to her, she gets a lot of credit, but she was part of an organizing movement. Yeah, she
was an activist. She was a secretary for the local NAACP. She'd been trained in nonviolent direct action. So this story of the seamstress who was too tired and didn't want to give enough already. But yes, it was, the term was applied to Black people and to white allies. And there were allies. There were white freedom riders. There were white people who were attacked and sometimes killed. We can think of Violet Liuzzo and the Schwerner and Cheney and Goodman and Schwerner, who died with Cheney in Mississippi. Right. So yes, the agitator label could be placed on Black people and white people too. Right, yeah. But we need to put these people on notice. The term is not acceptable to us.
Right. Yeah. It's kind of like when people use, it's different, but when people still use the term alt-left, someone was murdered, and then Trump called the people who murdered her, that side of it, part of the alt-left. Neera Tanden, who used to use that word a lot, the people who used to, traffic in it, most of them know you don't use that anymore because of Heather Heyer, but some people still do. But yeah, it's
so stupid. It's like the alt-right self-identified. They declared themselves to be alt-right. They claimed that they invented this term and claimed it and embraced it. There's no one who calls themselves alt-left. It's just a smear. A smear used against the left to delegitimize us.
Right. Yeah, that's exactly what it is. It's just to delegitimize, and it's very dangerous to equate. it's one of the most dangerous things that we've seen is when people equate the left and the right. Like the populist.
Oh, sure. Yeah, it's
Bernie Sanders is just like Trump because they both oppose TPP and resonate with angry people. If you hate Trump as much as you claim to, you want the guy who speaks to the people who will vote for him, who will take the voters away from him.
Unless you've been drinking the Kool-Aid and listening to accepting the propaganda.
Right.
So yeah, it's we have to be very careful. There are all these sneaky ways to. The goal is to get people to shut up and to be passive and to accept all these horrible things that they know are horrible, and they hope that we will stay asleep or will be afraid to act, or we just won't act, whatever our motivations are, that we will let them keep getting away with it. And that's why they couldn't allow even someone with liberalish reforms who would have had to fight his own party, even if he had become president. The odds of him being able to carry it out, but they know, and we should know, our power. They are terrified that people will start saying, I'm not accepting this anymore. And they want to kill any idea that there can be change that benefits the people. They want people to take their own priorities off their agenda and to keep going along with this race to the bottom, the increasing poverty, the insecurity in this country that's never talked about. Half of all Americans are low income. The minimum wage hasn't gone up for years. And when the Democrats had the power to do something about it, they did not. So we have people who are already living precarious lives, and their lives have grown more precarious. And so that's why they want to shut this down. They want people to stay home. George Floyd, if it's anything, they want people to be shut up and be quiet and accept their fate in this system that seeks only to keep exploiting.
Right. This is another thing that is reminding me of what you were saying. This was interesting. I don't know if you saw this, but let me just wait a second. It takes a while. So the original tweet that Ali Gharib, who's at The Intercept, is responding to is a tweet from Jill Filipovich, who said about this. In fact, I would love to hear your thoughts on this. Who tweeted, maybe white anarchists should sit this one out. And then Ali said, what about white liberals, though? Which was a pretty good point. But that is made me cringe, that maybe white anarchists should sit this one out, because it's so like, it's almost like when a white person is trying to like show how like down they are, and they like make fun of how bad white people are at dancing, how bad white people are at dancing, what bad dancers they are, we are, whatever. And it's just like, okay, you're trying really hard. But then this, in addition to that, has like a really dangerous, I think, political implication and attempt to like delegitimize, people who are. Yeah,
it's who nobody should sit this out. It's a good thing. It's a good thing that people of all. It was a very much a diverse, multiracial crowd at the protest. There were several protests in New York, but the one that I went to today, that is a good thing. Why, if people want to be allies, it's an overused term, but if people really mean it, they should be encouraged. And the fact is, use of the term anarchist. So anybody in a black T-shirt at a protest is called an anarchist. They may be, they may not be. But who's to say that somebody has to sit this out? No, everybody. No. We should not discourage anybody from being active at this moment.
That's actually dangerous, because we all know, like, this part of what this is about is that Black people are seen as more disposable by the police. And you are trying to thin out the crowd. Like, if you are taking white people out of those crowds, you're actually like endangering the people who remain more.
Well, there's that, but I think one of their biggest fears is that there will be multiracial activism. It's terrifying to them, and that's the last thing they want, is people to identify with one another. So that, to me, if people are very serious about it, and and being an ally is, I always say the ultimate white ally was John Brown. So if you're willing to do what he did, you can call yourself an ally. But I don't mean to use that word loosely. But no, this idea that only the group that's impacted, in this case, Black people, should be the only ones who speak up. No, everybody should speak up. I'm glad other people are speaking up. We have unique problems, of course. Black people we're the ones who are targets. We have this, as we say at Black Agenda Report, the Black misleadership class, the ones talking about agitators and Russians. These are people who are beholden to the Democratic Party donor class. They are joined at the hip, and their job is to keep Black people under control. And that's why they say things that are laughably stupid. They don't even believe this stuff. Mark Morial, I'm sure he doesn't believe that Russians are causing a protest in Minnesota. He knows that, but that's not his job. His job, to keep the money flowing, to keep his own prominence, is to follow. And it seems like a memo went out in the last 24 hours or so that, okay, people were upset about the video. The cop got arrested. So everybody, just forget about this. Go, nothing to see here. Move it along. And that's why these people are showing their naked, they're scoundrels. They're just scoundrels.
Yeah, I'm just going to show this tweet, something that you tweeted out about this, because it's so interesting and scary when Now I didn't read the article. You linked to a
Yeah, I had to link to Breitbart because
that's part of the problem, right? Is that other people, I mean, and I don't know if Breitbart, I didn't read it. I don't know if their point is that, look what idiots these people are. They're pretending this is a Russia thing. Or
they didn't seem to have a point of view. They seem to be just reporting it. I started hearing this morning on Twitter and Facebook that Mark Morial had blamed Russians for the protest, and I couldn't find the video. So I finally found it and I linked to it, and so I felt it was legitimate because they show the video. You click on it and you see his words. It's not Breitbart's interpretation. Right. It's him talking. So I made good use of it. But that's it's disgraceful. It's horrible.
Yeah, can I show the video to people?
Sure.
All right, let's make sure. Okay, hold on. Let's just watch this. It's all right, let's see. It's full screen. Oh no, I don't want that. Let's see. Okay, then I go back into this. This is a really you guys, StreamYard, you should all be you guys should sponsor me, StreamYard, because I keep, it's
amazing. This is my first time using it.
It's really cool, right?
I'm very impressed. Yeah.
Hold on one second. StreamYard is what I mean. Okay, and yes, I will not play the full thing because my producer's gonna have an. I mean, to be fair, it's not her. It's copyright law. But but let me just play. Sorry, where is this thing? Where's the break part? Okay. Now let me share screen. Okay, and go to Chrome. Okay, more. Okay, great. Alrighty. Now it'll take a second and. Let us go to this page. Okay. Oops. Here, I'll pause it and then we can let it buffer or whatever.
Yeah, it starts like that. Like that a minute in, he starts talking.
Yeah. I'll try to. We can keep talking, and then I can go back to that. Let me just stop the screen though. Yeah. It's. And what do you think of this? The narrative. I know that you're someone whose work you really respect, and I know he really respects yours, is Aaron Mate. And, I've had him on a bunch of times on my show and on Useful Idiots, which you should come on to, by the way, with the show that Matt and I do. But he's one of, you can literally count the people who talk about Russiagate on one hand. Oh, we have another guest. Can I bring in this other guest? I'm so excited.
Oh, okay.
Johanna Fernandez.
Oh, okay. Very nice. I do not know her, but so it'll be nice.
Right? Okay, yeah. So we have a guest coming in, and I'm really excited. And I think she either just was at a protest or is still at the protest. And I'm just going to bring her in, and we'll read her bio. 1 second. But she's a really great professor. And let me just let this in. Hold on 1 second. Great, Johanna.
Hi there.
Hi, thank you so much for coming. Margaret Kimberley of Black Agenda Report.
Nice to meet you.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Are you? No,
yes.
Okay. And Johanna is someone I've interviewed about many things, mostly about the work she does around Mumia Abu-Jamal. And she's a native New Yorker, received her PhD in history from Columbia University and a BA in literature, American civilization from Brown. She teaches 20th century U.S. history. The history of social movements, and she is in the Department of Black and Latino Studies at Baruch, and her
history. I'm in the Department of History at Baruch.
Oh,
that's all right.
But it says Department of Black and Latino Studies. You're in both?
Yeah, no, I'm no longer in Black. It's unclear why that appears, but
okay. You're a Department of History. Okay, yes. You're a historian. And your next book is this still your next book? No, because you wrote
it's out.
Right, yeah, it's a great book. What is it called? I don't have it.
It's called The Young Lords, A Radical History.
Okay, The Young Lords, A Radical History. I think I actually have it, so in the city. And so, okay, with that seamless intro, we were talking about the protests. And were you coming from one of the protests?
I'm still out here.
You're still out here, okay.
Thousands and thousands of people came out. Police cars were beaten up. They were given a black eye on Union Square. Some were burnt up. The cops were horrifically aggressive. In Manhattan, they just literally drove into a crowd and arrested quite a number of folks, but literally drove into a crowd both in Manhattan and in Brooklyn. And the images of these attacks, just the violence on the part of police against protesters is epic. But the demonstrations were massive, spirited, incredibly diverse, people of all races. It was just beautiful to behold.
Wow. And was anyone killed or injured that we know of yet in the driving?
I'm a little concerned about the scene in Brooklyn where 2 cop cars literally drive into a crowd of protesters who were standing their ground. And one instance of that here in Manhattan, but people were arrested, but I'm not sure. I was close by, but I couldn't tell. And they cleared out the area immediately. With batons, literally.
Wow. And where are you now? What neighborhood are you in?
So I'm in front of Baruch College where I teach. I came here with some folks to use the bathroom. We just left Union Square.
Wow. And what made you come out? And I mean, I have not been in the city since COVID really took off, and I've never been to a protest wearing a mask. What's it like, and what made you decide to protest?
Well, I'm a revolutionary, and this is a moment to stand up. Enough is enough. I think that we are seeing multiple pandemics in the United States, and we are now seeing the horror of police violence after we've seen the horror that the American government deployed against its people by not producing PPEs. We know that Black Americans are not just being killed in the streets, they're also being killed in hospitals, that we're disproportionately dying in America of COVID-19. I mean, this is when are we going to say that we are not going to allow the abuse anymore?
Yeah. Sorry.
No, go ahead.
Well, I was just reminded that something, I interviewed David Sirota about this, and we are Andrew Cuomo helps give immunity to these nursing home companies to protect them from basically keeping people safe, to let them slash their staff so that people in nursing homes can die of negligence. So it's a bipartisan thing that we've seen, and of course the people who are dying of COVID are disproportionately Black and brown people. So
absolutely. Yeah. So I feel that this is a different moment. I feel that the generations of people who are out have seen multiple videos of people being killed by the cops. This one was especially harrowing. The last word that George Floyd said was "mama."
I don't think I saw that part of it. Wow.
Mama. That was the last word he uttered before life left him. But we're talking about a generation, especially the young people, because young people are out in droves at these demonstrations, who, if you think about it, they've grown up in the Black Lives Matter era, but also in a period of economic devastation and disaster. So to them, the American government is not legitimate. There is a crisis of legitimacy, and enough is enough. I mean, and people have been cooped up, right? There's a fascinating combination of social forces that account for this uprising. It's the multiple pandemics, the economic crisis, the rise of white supremacy, the insanity of Trump, the sense that we've got a failed state and we're the wealthiest society humanity has seen. There was a sense of revelry and freedom at the demonstration that I hadn't really seen before. Yeah, it was really beautiful to behold. And the crowds, I mean, way farther than the eye could see. And we marched along Union Square, but also along the Hudson River Drive. Both highways were, I have protesters outside telling me that we've got to go.
Okay.
Both highways.
Revolution can't wait.
Both highways were blocked, by the way, by protesters, both the FDR and the West Side Highway. The cops were out with riot gear, but ultimately they are the few and we are the many. And at some point when we were out in the thousands, they had to get out of the way.
Yeah. So it's like a paradoxical, seems like inspirational, tragic, inspirational, infuriating moment.
Yeah. I mean, horrifically devastating and sad and traumatic. I haven't been able to watch that video in its entirety. I've watched elements of it. It's difficult to live with that, to sleep knowing that this happened. But what is amazing is that people in Minneapolis of different races have come out. Black people are leading, but working class white people came out in mass numbers. And there's a sense that that we have to defend Black life in order to defend our humanity, as a people, as a country. And the signs that are popping up are just beautiful. I mean, there's one sign, and I think it's important to say that working class white people are fighting, because we watch the television and we see Trump supporters and we think that white people in America en masse are a basket of deplorables. And there was an enormous amount of pessimism, right, in the run up to these protests, about the possibility of solidarity across racial lines. I'll just say, I don't know if you saw the placard. This woman called herself, she said, "I'm a Karen for against police brutality."
Oh, that's good. Yeah.
A Karen against police brutality. That's beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
KAB. Yeah.
Yeah.
P. What's wrong with KAP? Police brutality.
Yeah.
That's why. Yeah.
Police
KAP.
brutality.
Yeah.
Yeah. And there are Latinos and Asians. I mean, it's I was out during the Eric Garner demonstrations many moons ago now, it seems, 5 years ago in 2016, 4 years ago. And they were different. Well, now, I mean, the cities are up in flames. It's a rebellion. It's a rebellion unlike any we've seen, I think, since the 1960s across the country. In Baltimore in 2016, there was a fierce struggle with the police that looked like something out of the Middle East, Palestine. But here we're seeing people fighting the police everywhere, from Minneapolis to New York City to Atlanta. You probably heard that in DC, people were trying to get into the White House. So this is there's a sense of confidence. There's a sense that that we're not going to take it anymore. That we've got to fight for something or lose everything.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Anything else, Margaret? Do you have any questions? And Johanna, you probably have to run out. And my mom says hi, by the way. My mom.
Oh, hi. Hello.
Hello.
Yeah, it's people have seen too much. We've seen the movie. We know how it ends, and we.
Can you guys?
Yes.
Okay.
We saw Eric Garner die and that cop get off. We've seen it before. And people are saying enough is enough. And as Johanna was saying, on top of COVID, the medical crisis, the death, the illness, the economic devastation, and this is it's the last straw. And I think that is why people are in movement all over the country. And internationally, too, this shows America. It shows America. And it can't be denied anymore. And that is why America has to be investigated officially as a human rights violator in so many different ways. But I think this solidarity is important. We Occupy, I was just thinking about Occupy and how that was smashed by a Democratic president. I was thinking about Freddie Gray's, that rebellion in Baltimore, and Obama called the protesters thugs. And people, they may not be ready to talk about him in the way I am, but people still remember it. And that's why they're out.
Yeah. Yeah.
There are solidarity marches in Germany, in Italy, in Mexico. It's incredible to behold. And people are not just fighting for a different world in the United States. They're fighting for themselves. And they're seeing the connections among us all of different countries. So, I mean, beneath all of this, there's an economic crisis, devastation, as Margaret mentioned, of epic proportion. People are living hand to mouth before the pandemic.
Right.
Before the pandemic, across the world, here in the United States, and I mean, it's time. I think it's time. It's time to build something different. The question is, where do we go from here?
Right.
And there is a desperate need for organization and strategy. And it was incredible to see that the bus drivers, I don't know if you guys heard that the bus drivers yesterday refused to transport the protesters to jail.
Wow.
To their credit, yes.
In New York City and in Minneapolis. So this is really a moment for flexing and exploring the power of the working class. So, yeah, I mean, we need organization. We need organization. We need strategy. And we have to move beyond the episodic uprisings to a sustained resistance and movement.
And what about allyship from people who are, I mean, not even, well, there's allyship, and Margaret was making fun of that word because it has become a bit overused, but solidarity in terms of people who are not affected by police violence the same way, although, it's definitely not the great equalizer, but, there's, remember that white, where was it? It was in Minneapolis, where the white woman, who I think was Australian, was also shot by an officer.
Yes.
Right.
But he was black and went to jail.
Yeah, right. So what can people do? Not only, I mean, because people live in different different milieus, but also given that we're doing this in the midst of COVID, like what are different ways that people can show solidarity when they're immunocompromised and can't go out to a protest, or they're just not near the city right now?
Well, I think it's important to just say that you can't just not be racist. You have to be deliberately fighting against racism. And I think that it begins with education, talking to the people around you. If you can't go out onto a protest, taking a stand on social media. I think some people have been contributing to the bail funds of those who are being arrested. I think we need to engage in a conversation. That's where it begins. And I think that protest and militant protest of the kind that we're seeing forces a conversation.
Right.
And if we think about how we were able to to drive white supremacy underground the fire last time,
which was
in the 60s.
Okay.
In the 60s. It took a massive movement over the course of many, many, many years to drive away or underground the kind of white supremacy that we see rearing its head again. So, I think you ask a great question. What do we do in this period when folks can't go outside? Of course, there were lots of folks outside today, but it's a conversation. There were many, and older people too. Were you in Harlem? How was the
I was in Harlem. Yeah, people. I wore a mask. I'd say most people wore masks. I was less afraid being out of doors and protecting myself. The crowd split up. The rally began at the state office building, but then there was a group that split off and started a march going further downtown. I believe they linked up with the larger group that you were with. Right. But it was the same thing, diverse group, a lot of energy. But I also think when you take one step, it's easier to take the next one. And we're always told that what we can't have. You can't have health care. You can't get a raise. You can't. You have to be in student loan debt. You can't get your own apartment anymore. You have to live with all these things that you don't want, that dehumanize us and that threaten our lives. And when people step out, that's why they're trying to tell people not to protest anymore. Because if you go to a protest against police brutality, the next thing you know, you're going to have a general strike, or you will threaten the power structure in some way. That's why it is so important, not just for George Floyd, but for all the things that make the system so inhumane, that give us police forces that kill 1,000 people every year, and pandemics that target one group or the most marginalized groups of people in the country. They are all tied together. And they're also terrified that we will see the connections, and that when we fight against one thing, then lo and behold, the scales fall from your eyes, and then you're fighting against something else. So that's why they're telling people to stay home.
It's a gateway drug.
Yes.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, good. Yeah, and it is important. I think this, the more people, it's a safety, the power of numbers, right? I mean, it's just an organizing, old school organizing tactic that,
And they convince us that we're alone. We're always told that those of us on the left are alone. Nobody agrees with you. Nobody wants what you want. You can never have what you want. You're just crazy. Any number of things. And when you are literally with hundreds of other people or thousands of other people, then you know that's a lie. And then you'll take the next step to do something else that they don't want you to do.
Right. Yeah. And given that the fact that it's like happening with this pandemic makes it that much more impressive and like moving. And yeah. Well, Johanna, are your friends waiting for you? I mean, we could ask you a bunch more questions, but I don't want to ruin your friendships or anything. Or
no, I'll say that one of the slogans that is popular in these demonstrations is "Abolish the police."
Yep.
And we didn't imagine that would be a popular slogan, right? Just a year or 2 or 3 ago. But it's a demand that has been gaining strength. And, if you think about the origins of the police in the United States emerges for the first time as an institution to return slaves back to their masters who'd escaped, and to control slave rebellions. They're literally called slave patrols. which is language that we retain in the police today, and the beat.
Oh yeah,
by
the
the
patrol,
way,
yeah,
the patrol and the beat. The notion that we would retain an institution that is directly tied to the institution of slavery is something that we have to ask ourselves,
right?
Especially during the year that that 1619 slavery project got the big award. It's an important question to ask.
Yeah. I've had I would love to have on Michelle Alexander, but I've had on Alex Vitale, who wrote The End of Policing.
Yes.
And I didn't realize that the term Bobby, that the British used Bobby for police, and that's because it was named after Robert Peel, because it also had a really great origin story in Europe where it was like used to suppress Irish rebellions. And Robert Peel was the guy who started them there. Yeah. But yeah, I know okay. So you guys, Margaret's going to kill me because I've been pretty self-restrained. I just got to mention Amo Bernie, St. Bernard a couple times per hour. But even though he's not nearly where any of us are on the issue of police violence or police at all, I do think that a lot of the righteous indignation and outrage that we saw from Sanders, I think, has enabled people to see things differently. Like, I don't remember, it was recent, but one of you was saying the not accepting things anymore, the idea that things should be better, that things can't, that you don't have to be okay with things.
Right.
I'm not saying, like, I'm not crediting out to Bernie, but I do think that he tapped into something too, obviously. But this discourse of like outrage that that we're entitled to, not, it was you, Margaret, talking this, but that we're entitled to something more than what we know, and that it's not normal. It's like, that's so important.
Yeah, the idea that was, short-circuited, as we were discussing earlier, this idea that we don't have to take the crumbs that we're given, that you can be told, well, look at Trump, so you can't have, that's why Democrats like him. He's the perfect foil. He's their excuse for doing little or nothing. But the fact that someone could come from relative obscurity and challenge the power structure, it gave people hope. It gave people hope that they could have something differently. And that was short-circuited. And the question is, what are people going to do who had that hope, who had that energy? People who took time off from work to go canvass for him, they're just going to forget about that now? They're going to act as though they never had that experience, that they never had those feelings? I don't think so. So I think that's why I was hoping he would fight longer, because it would be a challenge. But I think things are happening, and that challenge is coming. It's coming anyway.
Yeah. And Johanna, do you have any updates about Mumia Abu Jamal?
He needs to be free. He needs to come home. You probably know that Jalil Muntakim has COVID-19, tested positive for COVID-19. Political prisoner Jalil Muntakim here in New York State. He's in the hospital right now, I think, still. Mumia is in Pennsylvania, and there's a pause on his case right now. I think until August. There was a huge opening, but the Fraternal Order of Police essentially was able to get the judges to consider the insane claim of the wife of the fallen officer. She's claiming that the new DA of Philadelphia,
Larry
Krasner, is in cahoots with our attorneys. Literally. And on that basis, she filed a King's Bench petition, a very, very rare petition that's hardly ever allowed to be argued in court, but the Pennsylvania Supreme Court has given it a hearing, and now the possibility of getting Mumia back in court is being delayed. In the meantime, COVID-19 is ravaging the prisons. Prisons are death traps in this period. There's absolutely no physical distancing. I think, however, that we need to make a connection between the killing of George Floyd and the horror of police brutality and imprisonment.
Yep.
The reason why we have more people in prison than any other country in the world is because we have a massive police force. The first step in this crisis of incarceration is the police picking you up in the street.
Right.
So as Margaret was saying, we need to make the connections, and people are making the connections. And we need to tie these movements together. The movement to get rid of police officers and the police, the abolish the police, has to be connected to the movement to abolish prisons. And I think this movement to abolish prisons is critical because ultimately it raises questions about what kind of society we want to live in.
Yeah.
Do we want to live in a society that throws people away? Or do we want to live in a society that builds schools and community centers and jobs, and that allows us to be full human beings? And that's not the society we live in. Ultimately, I think we have to start talking about, and people are, the fact that capitalism is bankrupt, and we've seen it in this period, that capitalism will not solve our problems. In fact, capitalism is responsible for the death and devastation of so many, disproportionately Black and Latino and poor, but many. And as Margaret said, this is really a moment for rethinking how we live. And of course, these ideas have to be organized. They need to be taken from today into the future. Okay, I have to go because my friends are like going to abandon me.
Okay, yeah.
We're still in the streets. Thank you so very much for the
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
Yeah, I'll give you guys
Thank
your
you.
info after. Bye,
Thank
Johanna. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Wow, that was such a treat.
It was nice. Great. Thank you. What a nice surprise.
I know, yeah. I didn't know she was going to be able to do it, or I would have prepared better. But it was good. It was a good test of, yeah, she's, that's really true. I mean, I think that the death penalty is so atrocious, and it's so black and white.
Yep.
Like, it's so morally, it's so reprehensible. And that's another thing that's a good gateway, right? Like a gateway issue, a gateway.
Sure.
Then you look at the larger system. But it is a good way, I think, for people to then look at the bigger question. Yeah.
Yeah, sure. It's it's a funny thing. I was thinking about a couple years ago. Do you remember when the cops got mad at de Blasio, and so they didn't write tickets for several days?
Yeah.
Well, our lives weren't any worse. I was like, well, I feel just fine. This is great to me.
I know.
And I was like, well, thank you for proving my case. We don't need as many cops. They don't need to have guns. They arrest people for BS. So we don't need them. And to have a society free of our capitalist society is to blame for, so as Johanna was just saying, it does not do anything for us. It's the days when, where many people had living wage work are over. Capitalism is just, it's sucking the lifeblood out of the economy and out of people. And the idea of Jeff Bezos being richer and possibly becoming a trillionaire at some point. It's just horrifying. The fact that we live under billionaire rule is killing us, killing the planet. And we have to talk about how to get rid of that too. And yes, we have people who've been so propagandized and think, anything that helps you is A, socialism, and B, is bad.
Right.
When we have this horrible system that's killing us all. But I also think that people will be less susceptible to listen to those things when they see other people acting and they see success.
Right. Yeah. When these things are less fringe. I mean, that is another thing
Exactly.
that I think was important about O'Byrne, is that he did show that these things that have been, they've been mainstream, but they've always been framed as fringe.
Yes.
And
yes.
now we know that's not true. So
right. And that's why you have to delegitimize everything he said. And the way Black people were used in this campaign, it was just shameful to me. Telling Black people, well, you may want what he wants, but white people aren't going to vote for him. Yeah. And, since Black politics is dead and now consists only of keeping Republicans out of office, that was enough. All you had to do was convince people that trying to get what they wanted was somehow going to be bad for them. Right. But when events like this, like the time we're living in, it's easier for people to just throw out things they've been told and not to cling to things they may have accepted in the past.
Yeah.
This crisis of legitimacy can, if we are organized, can turn things around for us. So,
yeah. So how do we organize? Final question. What do we do? What is to be done?
We don't stop. First of all, we do not stop. We look at things that work. We looked at things that did not work. And we do not listen. If you don't know anything else, you have to know who not to listen to. Right. So these politicians using the word agitator and telling you to stay home, don't listen to them.
Yeah.
If you have had a plan and it can start very simply. If you go to a protest with a group of people and you have a plan to stick together, that can be the seed. That can be the start. And we have to study history, study the past. But I think we can even start by asking questions. You don't have to know the answer. You can start by asking the question, or just believing what you see. Things are wrong, and just say things are wrong, and be in solidarity with other people. I think trying to do things alone, even if it's trying to avoid being arrested at a demonstration. But they're always telling us to do things on your own. And that is proof to me that they're afraid of us being together and working together.
Yeah. And you put out, didn't you put up, you put out some tips for people, looking for them right now.
Yes, I did. I got them from other folks about demonstrations and what to do and what not to do. You should frankly turn off your phone or put it in airplane mode. Have a plan, go with a group of people. There are attorneys who are observers. Sometimes people plan to be arrested, but that's something you have to be very careful about. You have to think about whether you want to do it. If you're not a citizen, you may not want to do it. And just some safety recommendations. Photographing people, photograph the police and not other participants, because your video can be used to arrest somebody else later on. So those are some of the things that I can remember off the top of my head.
Here.
Great.
And it says, I'll post it right here. That's the link. Actually, I'm gonna do another screen share so that people can see it. Okay, here we go. Share. Okay. So if you're attending these actions,
yes.
Margaret tweets, if you're attending these actions, turn the location off on your phone, wear a mask, cover all identifiable features like tattoos, buddy up, Have a meetup location in case folks get separated. If you're recording, don't put visible faces on camera. Always record the cops.
Yeah.
So I guess that means do a real close up.
And it's very important to keep yourself from being identified. I want to add also, nobody should ever turn themselves in. There was a young man in Baltimore. His life was destroyed. His parents, who meant well, he was photographed trashing a police car, and they really hit him with the hammer. Black prosecutors. He did not go to jail, but his life was devastated. Don't ever turn yourself in, ever. I don't care if your face is shown. You get a lawyer. Should be on the way to a lawyer's house and not to a police station. You never turn yourself in. You never admit to a crime. Don't talk to the police. For many, many different reasons. Don't talk to law enforcement. So I would add those things. And
oops, I lost you.
Yeah.
Hey, you're giving advice and you're silenced.
Yeah, I know. A burner phone. You need to have a cheap phone.
Exactly,
you shouldn't bring your iPhone to a demonstration. So that's something I need to do myself. I need to get a secondary phone.
Oh, yeah. Got some nice shout out from Phil Winter. Mad Random but Prejudential by Margaret Kimberley is a great book you can read in a day. That's not random.
That's true. It is a great book, and you can read it in a day.
Oops. I can't hear you guys. Sorry.
Yes, a friend of mine called it a brisk read. I love that.
It's really good, and it's it's so deadpan the way it's written.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Phil Winter, whoever you are. Thank you so much.
Well, you can send him a signed book.
I certainly will. I will do that.
Also, when protesting, another thing from Phil, if you wear contacts, take them off, wear your glasses. You could go blind if that tear gas hits you with contacts. Wow.
That's true. That's true. Yeah. Also, Matt Random Talk by Cornel West.
Yes, it was before he went totally crazy right wing, I think. And he actually asked them about creeping socialism. And I think I was in high school and I raised my hand and I said something about creeping capitalism or something.
Good for you.
Yeah. And then then he called me Sister Katie, but that's his default anyway. So
yes, it is.
Get to my head too much. He's hilarious though. Well, this was really great. Thank you, and I'm so.
Thank you for asking me.
Thank you for staying up. I know this is a little beyond after your bedtime, and
that's all right. Yeah. It's tomorrow's Sunday. I can sleep a little later.
Yeah, sleep in. Thank you again so much, and
I'll
stay on a little bit to talk to people. This is great, and I'll link to all of your stuff. But follow her on Twitter, which is Freedom Ride
blog,
blog, and then Black Agenda Report is Black. It's BLC.
Blackagendareport.com. Oh, on Twitter. BLK Agenda Report on Twitter.
Yeah. Awesome. And thank you again so much. And I have so much more to ask you. So we'll have to have you on again.
Thank you. Okay. Good night.
Good night.
Bye-bye.
Bye. So what's this thing that Matt